Hello, everyone. This is Maya with Trials with Maya Z, and I have the pleasure today to bring you one more patient advocate and a patient, Heidi Floyd. Heidi, I became a little more excited because Heidi has an incredible story. Uh, she was a patient with breast cancer, and actually since 25, like 2005. She decided to become also a patient advocate and share her story loud. The reason why I became very excited but also nervous, you can tell by my voice, is because I have one of my best friends went through a breast cancer, and yes, this is, let's say, very personal story, and the way Heidi went through hers is absolutely incredible. So, Heidi, first of all, welcome. Thank you so
Thank you.
much for sharing your story, not only at Trials with Heidi, but generally speaking, because I know this is very difficult. And yes, let's start with just understanding a little bit more about yourself, Heidi.
Sure. I am someone who was always aware of breast cancer. My mother passed away from breast cancer when she was quite young. She was early 40s. And all
To
the
share
women
that.
in my family have had cancer of one sort or another. So it was something that I was familiar with. I did not anticipate that I myself would be diagnosed. I was 36 when I was diagnosed, and I had just found out I was pregnant. So that's the, that kind of care is very difficult because there are not a lot of,
Yeah.
at that time there were not a lot of oncologists who would take care of me. I had to make the choice. Do you want to continue your pregnancy or do you want to go ahead with cancer treatment? The two of them were not meshed at that time, so I had to look around and find an oncologist who would treat me while I was pregnant. And so we actually did find a remarkable doctor who was wise and knowledgeable, had executed clinical trials. He worked in the lab as well as in clinics. So he was learned and quite wise, and explained to me, even though I was not part of a clinical trial, there were people that had come before me. So I was the recipient of clinical trials. We actually went through my entire pregnancy with chemotherapy. And they had learned, of course, over the years that you could not, you can't have radiation when you're pregnant. You can't have elaborate surgeries, things like that. You're not supposed to. So we did just chemotherapy while I was pregnant. And so that you and I were just discussing, it looks, to a lot of people, it's almost inconceivable being pregnant, going through chemotherapy. I had, so this is my fourth child that I was pregnant with during that time. My previous pregnancies, I was wildly sick during all of them. So, I mean, from the moment of conception until birth. So for me, when they're like, oh, you're going to be quite sick during chemo, and I was like, oh, whatever, it sounds just like pregnancy. So of course I make light of that, but the other things that come with chemotherapy, the unmitigated exhaustion and hair loss and the mental health challenges that come with that. So it was layered on top of that. But the base thing that everyone seems to think about is the getting sick, while you're on chemotherapy.
Yeah.
And for me, that wasn't the biggest part. The biggest part was everything else, because I was quite used to that due to my other pregnancies. So
One positive thing about like being sick and pregnancy, I can definitely understand you because I had two pregnancies, and
yeah,
with two of them, I was also quite sick. So
yeah,
let's say that I'm one step like more closer to understanding what it's like chemotherapy. I don't want to understand it in reality, but
this is
sometimes we need to. Like, life is life.
yeah, yeah,
Heidi, you decided to turn this experience into something better. And you
yeah,
decided to become a patient advocate
yeah,
and help companies and help research, help the life sciences
yeah,
industry in general to better understand patients and create treatments in a better
yeah,
way for patients,
yeah, yeah.
which is very admirable. Like, thank you so much, like, for doing that. Can you tell me from your experience, like for so many years now, why you decided to do that first first, but
Yeah.
also why do you believe this is so critical for companies to take into consideration the patient experience and the patient journey before
Well,
doing any clinical trial, before planning
yeah,
any
yeah.
project?
From the beginning, I agree. That's a great question. I decided to because I realized watching, being intimately involved as a caregiver to my mom when she was going through her
Mm.
treatment. Um, you know, I know that if she had gotten a second opinion, things would have been different. I know that had she enrolled in a clinical trial, it would have been very different for her. But it wasn't. And I learned that by watching her walk through it and then doing research on my own, just kind of diving in and saying, if you give donations to such and such and such and such, where are they going? What are they doing? And then
Mm.
when I was going through my own diagnosis, I felt utterly alone. I was the only one who was in her 30s getting chemotherapy while pregnant. I was there with people who were going to be great grandmothers. It's a very different experience for someone who's young going through cancer. And so kind of forward focused, when you're going through an experience like that, and if you're a mom, all you think about are the children, the next generation. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
clinical trials are so crucial, not just for us middle-aged moms, but for the next generation and the next generation. Like
Mm.
we if there are kind of two kinds of people in this world: the type of people who believe, well, I had it tough, so you should have it tough, or I had it tough, so I'm going to make sure you don't.
Yeah.
I'm in that second camp. I know what
Mm.
it's like to go through that, and no one should. So if we can make it better for other people, yes, we absolutely should. The onus is on us to do that. And I think it's crucial for companies of pharmaceutical medical community to look at patients and engage them, like you said, early on, way before you even think about designing a clinical trial. You should have patients embedded in your company that you can turn to and talk to about everything, so that by the time you roll around to designing a clinical trial, you've already got 3 people that work there that you can bring in at
Mm.
any moment to talk about them. And I don't mean patient advocate, the professional patient advocate groups. Um, some of them are fantastic. Some of them just want money. Like it's a business for them,
Mm.
right? So in the end, they're not looking actively to engage with people. Some of them are not looking
Yeah.
actively to engage in the voices they need to hear from: the minority populations, the underserved populations, people that can't afford to go to pharma meetings. You know what I mean? Those are the voices you need to hear from. If you're looking to tailor a clinical trial around a specific group, you can't go to a really large patient advocacy group and just hope that somewhere in there is this specific type of community. You have to go to that community. Don't
Yeah.
go to the real large patient advocacy groups. Go to where they live. If you want to engage with those type of patients, go to them. Don't take the easy road and go to patient advocacy group. Go to the actual patients. That's kind of my big thing.
But why is it so important, Heidi? Like from your experience, have you seen any like scenarios where companies doing that get way better results, or the opposite?
Sure. Well, I've seen the opposite. I've recently engaged with a couple of, and by that I just mean conversations, and talk to, because I'm not compensated in any way by any pharmaceuticals or anything like that. I've seen companies reaching out to actual patients, and that's beautiful. I've also seen on the other side, I've been kind of an advocate advisor. So people will come to me who are in clinical trials, or
Hmm.
their sisters will reach out, or their bosses will reach out. Somebody will say, Heidi, I've got this friend who's in a clinical trial and she's really struggling. Can you talk to her or him? Sure. I meet with them, and they feel like, and this is universal. It doesn't matter the disease space. It doesn't matter age, race, gender, none of that matters. It's the same voice. And it's always saying things like, well, this is really difficult. I don't want to bother my doctor. I don't want to tell them. I'm just going to quit quietly.
I
And
love
they're the
that.
voices that clinical trials need. People in clinical trials don't realize that they're the most important thing. And that's not being expressed to them. It's not a relationship that hasn't been established. So the people that are in clinical trials need to understand they're in charge. It matters. It's not a light switch, like this medicine is too hard, so I'm out. No, talk to your medical professional, talk to the people running the clinical trials, because it's a dial. They can adjust it. Yours is the voice they need the most. You are the
Mm.
underrepresented community. You're who they're trying to reach. You're in charge of everything. You are the most valuable thing, but they don't feel like that. They feel like they're just a name on a spreadsheet, and that's heartbreaking. So that's why
Yeah.
it's so important. They won't be number on a spreadsheet that says, well, they bowed out. Why? What is the
Yeah.
reason? And if you had a relationship with them, you would know why, that they can't afford to go to the treatments, or their spouse is pressuring them, or there's a difficulty in sticking to it. So that's really important.
I was going to ask you exactly that, Heidi. What's your observations? Like, is there any reason that repeats itself for quitting from a clinical trial? Is there anything that's very common that people say, "Well, I can't do it anymore"?
Yeah, a lot of it, and again, I'm only based in the US, so my
Yeah.
vision is very limited. When I've talked to
Hmm.
clinical trials in other countries, it's just very different because your medicinal care is different. Your the way
Your
you
standard of
treat
care
people,
is different,
yes,
basically.
completely different.
Yes.
So just as a
Yeah.
caveat, I'm only speaking for the US. A
Hmm.
lot of it in the US is financial. A lot of it.
Mm.
So if you can afford, the insurance, then it's not an issue. One thinks. However, there's still the matter of driving physically to the clinical trials, because a lot of people, if they're in rural areas, they can't get in their own car and drive because it could take a long time. And it's even as simple as, if you do get a ride, if you are able to drive, can you afford to park in the parking space? I mean, it's little things like that
Mm.
that no one thinks about, because it's,
Oh my God.
if you're a doctor conducting a clinical trial, $5 for parking is nothing. But if you're living in a rural environment, the gas to get there, the car to get there, parking there, buying your own lunch, like all of that stuff
Yeah.
equates to a lot of money. And let's say you're a single mom, you have to do all of that and make sure you get back in time to pick up the kids from school. Now you can't afford a babysitter. Like all of these things, a lot of it is financial based burden, and a lot of it is geography. If you live in a rural part of Alabama, you're not going to be engaged in a clinical trial if you can't get there. If you can't, would it help if someone came to you? Absolutely. If, again, I go back to the same thing, it's relationship based. If you don't have a relationship with the patient with whom you're conducting this clinical trial, you'll never get the answers. You won't know what their world looks like. You won't know that their husband is telling them that this is a waste of time, or that their best friend is saying,
Mm.
I can't drive you today, or their work is telling them, you take one more hour off and you're going to lose your job. If you had a relationship with that patient, you would know.
Yeah, but like, is that even feasible, Haiti? Because I'm actually from Europe. And in Europe, for example, I see more and more doctors just simply don't have the time.
Time,
And I can,
exactly.
yeah, exactly. And I think that in the States is more or less the same. Like
Yep.
doctors don't have the time. So
Nope.
if you're close, but how do you build this relationship, close
Yep.
relationship, where you don't have the time? You have 10 minutes per visit, and I don't speak about clinical trials. I speak about the general
Regular visits.
practice.
Yep, of course. Yep. Yep. I agree.
Exactly. So,
Usually they have like 3 minutes, right, on average to spend with each patient.
see,
It's not on the doctors. However, the doctor has a team of people, and I think with proper training, that team. So you've got someone sitting at a front desk who checks you when you go and you sign your name, I'm
of
here, what have you. If that person asks one question quietly, because you don't want everyone in the waiting room to hear, right? But
course.
just a general observation. How are you? Great. I had a head time parking, whatever. Great. That information then gets collected and reported to the next person, who takes you in to weigh you and take your blood pressure, right? Then that person, you're in a more secure environment. That person says, hey, is anything weighing on you today? Anything stressful for you today? Now you have 2 questions answered that the doctor doesn't have to ask. And then the third person, who brings you into the room with a clipboard and sets you up, they ask another question, right? A little bit more in depth, because now you're completely alone. It's completely private. What's the best thing that happened to you this week? What's the worst thing that happened to you this month? Now you've got 4 questions that have been asked that could
Yeah.
be very key for mental health issues. So when it's reported to the doctor, not just their blood pressure, not just their weight, not just what they're suffering from or what have you, but also, she said something about her boyfriend, like, was yelling at her. Like, now the doctor
Mm.
has a little bit more of a perspective. He can't do a deep dive, but he could say, we have a mental health specialist. I'd love to have him come in and talk to you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the doctor, it's not all on the doctor. It's part of the team. The team could be trained to ask these crucial questions, so that if there's little flags or little
Yeah.
celebrations, oh, you have a 3-year-old, your daughter celebrated her 3rd birthday. Isn't this wonderful? Like, that could change the tenor of the entire meeting.
Yeah.
So good and bad. It's not all on the doctor. It's also not all on the patient. It's a whole team. And again, if it's a relationship, then the next time the patient comes, she'll say, oh yeah, that's the nurse that I talked to last time. I'm going to tell her more. Hey, listen, my boyfriend's still yelling at me. You know what I mean? You still,
Yeah.
now you build that relationship.
A
So
report.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I wonder, Heidi, because sometimes, actually, in the States, this is more feasible. This can be achieved because you have these research centers that are totally dedicated on clinical research.
Yep.
So you can literally make sure that these teams work together, every single one of them, to collect information and maybe have like their systems to collect this information, make sure that they're on top of
Yep.
like patients. But then again, I'm thinking, can also technology somehow support this process of understanding how our patients, and have you seen any success stories when technology, an app, or I don't know, like something that makes like these people feel a little bit more secure, or it has to be always person?
It doesn't have to be in person. I found, so during COVID, we learned a lot about how we can do
Yeah.
things remotely, and that was the first step. The first step as a breast cancer patient to engage with someone. I remember the first time my oncologist said, well, we're going to have our interview over the phone. I'm like, am I going to take my shirt off on camera? Because that's not who I am. But she's
Yeah.
like, no, goofball, that's not how this works. Like, so that kind of conversation
Yeah.
happened. But right at the beginning of COVID, I had an issue that I needed physical therapy for. And I'm like, how am I going to go to physical therapy if we can't talk to one another? Well, they've made great strides. So there was a device that I was signed up for, and it was little straps that you put on your body with little diodes. And I learned how to they sent me a little tablet, and I learned how to do stretches and adjustments and things like that. And they recorded not my image, but just the dots.
Yeah.
So they can see, oh, she can't bend her arm back because of the surgery she's had. Here's what we can do to gently move that arm back. So they literally just looked at little dots, and then we'd check in once a week. So I would do this every day with this little tablet, my straps on, no humans involved, just me. And then she would connect with me for 15 minutes on Friday and say, when you reach your arm, be sure to go up a little bit higher every day. Just little tips. And so I was working with this AI, this device, not a human, just this device. I had a once a week check-in, and it engaged my mobility. It allowed me to have more mobility. Whereas if you had asked me 5 years ago if that would happen, I'd be like, no, I'm not going to strap things on. And like, that's not going to happen. But yes, there have been things.
Yeah.
So it's just that engagement, it's getting over the trepidation and fear, trying to do so, and then trusting what your doctor tells you. But again, because I had the relationship with my doctor and I had good insurance, I was able to get this device to trust what my doctor told me and then move ahead. So I had a complete AI situation happening on my body, and I was good with it. But that's not who I am naturally. I'm
Yeah. Yeah. That's
completely
very
reticent.
interesting.
Yeah. So
It's very
it
interesting.
can work.
If I had to summarize, so the like building this relationship, just to make it like very pragmatic, building this relationship actually means that the patient will really believe that you care.
Yes,
You may
you
not be
must
just a
care.
doctor, but like the whole
Yep.
team, that even like, let's say the sponsor behind a clinical trial, that they genuinely care about you as a person. And
Yep.
they take care of you. And in order to do that, you have to show that you know their journey. You know you understand their standard of care journey, but you also take care of the journey throughout the clinical trial. You adapt in order to help them out. And
Yes.
that's really critical, because otherwise, if the patient doesn't feel that they're being taken care of, they simply decide to quit, and that's a huge problem.
Yes.
Heidi, I know you
No
need
trust.
to go,
Yeah.
but I have one last question, one really quick question, because I think it's important and it's a big topic as well.
Of course.
Do you think pregnant women should be a part of clinical research? Because today, that's the number one eligibility criteria. If you're a pregnant woman, no clinical trial. So, your thoughts?
I think it's up to each individual woman and her oncologist. I think again, it's a relationship. If you trust the person who's leading you through that, I mean, if you're pregnant, most of us are concerned about the baby inside of us. I would think, I could be very wrong, but most pregnant people are concerned about that. And so if you have assurances that your baby will be safe, yeah, we'll try it, especially knowing, that it's going to be helping thousands of other pregnant women in the future. So I think, and when you get to the point of clinical trials, they've already tested it in mouse models and things like that. So it's already,
Yeah.
it's not like you're going cold from, I have an idea, let's put it in a human. That's not how clinical trials work. They have to go through an elaborate process. So, my personal opinion is that it's up to you personally and your doctor. You
It
have to
should
be
be
able
a
to trust your
choice,
doctor.
basically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and you know, if you're overly concerned, what are the ramifications? If you wait until the baby is born, if you engage in a clinical trial, will it help you? Will it help the baby? Will it hurt you? Will it hurt the baby? And
What happens after that?
what happens after? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Interesting. Hey, thank you so much for sharing your story, for your. I know we can spend the entire day even chatting, but I know we
yeah.
have to go. So thank you
Yes,
once again for the story and all the work you're doing. It's really meaningful.
my pleasure. Thank you so much. I'm so glad we connected.